Greetings, Earthlings! My name is O.B.T, and to start off today, we are going to play with a puzzle. This is the 9-dot puzzle, and the goal is to join all 9 dots with only 4 straight lines, without taking your pen from the paper. Before we continue to today's video, see if you can solve the puzzle on your own, and make sure to come by next time to find the answer and explanation. No cheating. That's it for now. O.B.T is O.U.T.
Hello, good people. This is our 8th video. We're calling it Ever Wonder How to Travel Between Your Ego and Your Inner Essence. And I think this is a very important video for people to understand, because we're getting stuck in our ego, where if we understood how to travel towards our inner essence, it will make life easier in many ways. Okay? Last video, in the beginning of it, we had people get into their inner essence for a moment, get into the place where they thought they were most authentic, most real, or most themselves, and come up with a word that would describe that place for you. And the words are absolutely magnificent. What that says to me is if we've got 50 different words from 50 different people for this video, and probably over the past couple of years, I've got hundreds and hundreds of times that I've used this exercise and people coming up with a word that they think describes their inner essence, their most authentic self. The power of what those words are and where people live, I think, is striking. So I want to make sure that we see that, we hear that, and we take a moment just to realize that that's a group of people trying to attest to what their inner essence is in one word. The first piece is going to be, what is the issue? What is the dilemma that we are all living with, given the title of this? And I want to start with a book we've used before called The Act of Will by Roberto Assagioli. And I just want to give you a history of what he's talking about. If a man from a previous civilization, an ancient Greek, let us say, or a Roman, suddenly appeared among present-day humanity, his first impressions would probably lead him to regard it as a race of magicians and demigods. But were he a Plato or a Marcus Aurelius and refused to be dazzled by the material wonders created by advanced technology, and were he to examine the human condition more carefully, his first impressions would give place to great dismay. He would soon notice that though man has acquired an impressive degree of power over nature, his knowledge and control of his inner being is very limited. He would perceive that this modern magician, capable of descending to the bottom of the ocean and projecting himself to the moon, is unable to reach up to the luminous subconscious levels and to become aware of his true self. This supposed demigod, controlling great electrical forces with a movement of the finger and flooding the air with sound and pictures for the entertainment of millions, would be seen as being incapable of dealing with his own emotions, impulses, and desires. This next piece is focusing on our depth as human beings and where our inner essence can be found, can be acknowledged, can be nourished. Again, I'm starting with Beyond Religion, which is the book I've used previously and absolutely love. Soren Kierkegaard, the founder of existentialism, believed that the goal of life is to be that self that one truly is. Psychoanalyst Karen Horney tells us that if we are prevented from expressing our real self as children, we will instead actualize an ideal self. As a result, we will eventually feel self-contempt as we sense the discrepancy between who we really are and the false self we have created. Psychologist Alice Miller makes the same point, telling us that depression is the result of being separated from one's true self. And finally, similarly, Abraham Maslow, who we've spoken about many times, said, if this essential core of the person is denied or suppressed, he, she, or they gets sick, sometimes in obvious ways, sometimes in subtle ways. This inner nature is weak and delicate and subtle and easily overcome by habit, by cultural pressure. Even though denied, it persists underground forever, pressing for actualization. Whether we call this inner nature, soul, being, higher self, there are so many words from the West and so many more words from the East, all of which are speaking about the same place, and for this video, we're calling it our inner nature. Now we're getting to the meat and potatoes of what we're talking about, the basic concept, connecting the ego and the inner sense. I'm going to start with Carl Jung, and people that are well known for having studied with Carl Jung. I'm going to start with The Science of the Soul by Edward Edinger, and I'm just going to read a little piece about what he says. A momentous discovery of the 20th century made by Jung is that there are two centers in the individual psyche, not one. The ego is one, and the self with a capital S is the other. Then I'm going to move into Ego and Archetype by Edward Edinger, same person, different book, and read two things that he says also. The self is the ordering and unifying center of the total psyche, consciousness and unconsciousness, just as the ego is the center of the conscious personality only. And lastly, since there are two autonomous centers of psychic being, the relation between the two centers, the ego and the inner essence, becomes vitally important. And unfortunately, I don't think most people understand that we have two centers and live their whole life thinking that the only way to ground oneself and the only center they have is the ego. Going to move into Boundaries of the Soul by June Singer, who's also very well known in the world of Jungian psychology. There is a map, and there'll be a picture of the map that you'll also be able to look at, which is kind of cool, looking at the ego, what Jung calls the transcendent function, and unconsciousness. And his calling it the transcendent function is just another way of referring to the inner essence or the soul. Again, the trick here is all the different words, but the concept is so similar that it is a second grounding point that we all have and that most people don't understand. Okay, so that's going to be really cool as well. Now I want to move on to Roberto Assagioli. Both Jung and Assagioli were huge in the time of Freud, and both disagreed with Freud, where Freud would not speak about the spiritual part of the human being, about the soul, the spirit, the higher self, the transcendent function, and both Jung and Assagioli thought that were so central and so important that they broke with Freud because they wanted to highlight that in their work and in their writing and in their teaching. Here's a quote coming right from Roberto Assagioli, trying to explain his difference from Sigmund Freud. In one of his letters, Freud said, "I am interested only in the basement of the human being. Psychosynthesis is interested in the whole building. The higher parts, the lower parts in every room in the house." I think Carl Jung would wholeheartedly agree with that as well. And the map is Assagioli's map of the egg diagram, of which there are many, many forms of that, but it talks about the unconsciousness having, where Freud says your unconscious is just sexual and evil and aggression. Both Jung and Assagioli are saying we clearly have a lower unconscious where that stuff is stored, but we also have our higher unconscious where acts of kindness and compassion and goodwill are also there. And if we're going to look at the unconscious, let's look at the entire house. And the map also will show you that with different words, but that both Jung and Assagioli don't see them as separate, don't see them as a light switch which is on and off. They both see them as a rheostat, meaning it's one step at a time. You can dimly go from one place in the ego to the inner essence or back again. And it happens on a moment by moment where literally it changes so quickly that we can be in one spot on that bridge in one moment and another spot a moment later. The question becomes, do you realize that you have both centers, both grounds, and are you willing to travel between both places? Next category, we're going back to evolution. And a workshop I've done many times is called The Girl with the Four Brains, Understanding the Source of Your Mind chapter. And part of that is in our first video here called Ever Flip Your Lid, but I want to repeat a lot of this. If we're looking at the evolution of the brain, we begin with a reptilian part of our brain, which is what reptiles only have. And the essence of the reptilian part of our brain is staying alive, as if one individual being staying alive. Then hundreds of thousands of years later, when mammals appeared, we have the mammal brain on top of the reptile brain. And the mammal brain is basically saying, we need to live together in groups and tribes because we can do a lot more if we're trying to do stuff together than just having one person stay alive. We're also going to be taking care of our young. We're also going to be having a greater level of problem solving and creativity that we're able to do. But the mammal part of our brain, which we still have as humans, is the second part of our brain. The third part of our brain is the distinctly human part of our brain, and there are two hemispheres. The left hemisphere is the world we're living in. It's guiding everything we're doing, and this civilization is based on that. And it's basically problem solving with a very analytical, sequential, logical part of our brain. The fourth part of our brain, our right hemisphere, is more relational, holistic, and intuitive. And we'll talk about that before this video is over. But if you want to look at the first video, the Ever Flip Your Lid, or you want to look at the other video talking about ever having a meaningful life, those two videos by themselves will also talk about the evolution of our brains. But I wanted to start today talking about the fact that we all have four narratives that are normative for every human being, because the reptile brain's always saying, stay alive, stay alive, stay alive, how to do this, and shouting that. The mammal part's going, what can we do as a group of people together, with a family, with a tribe, with a group, with a town, with a village, with a country, and how can we make that work best for us? The left hemisphere is a little quieter, but it's kind of going, how can we problem solve, and what's the rational mind saying to us? And the quietest one is our right hemisphere going, we have powers that this civilization has hardly delved into yet, and that would be our inner essence, our soul, our being. Okay? So that's number one there. Number two is, for that one of my favorite novelists is a man whose name is Tom Robbins, and I want to just read in one of his novels what he says about that, because I think he puts it in narrative form so really well. When life was a constant struggle between predators, a minute-by-minute battle for survival, reptile consciousness was necessary. When there were seas to be sailed, wild continents to be explored, harsh territory to be settled, agriculture to be mastered, mine shafts to be sunk, civilization to be founded, mammal consciousness was necessary. However, given where we're living today and the issues we have today, neither of those can dominate any longer, because we see the world we've created with those two parts of our human brain dominating. And I want to go into the other parts of the brain so that we understand where we're heading and where inner nature soul being is. Now let's look at our right hemisphere, the fourth narrative we have inside of us, the most quiet one, the one where we don't live in often enough. I want to start with the opposite of transcendent perception is reductionism. And transcendent perception is going back to perception with the right hemisphere. Reductionism is using only the left hemisphere. And this next example will make that very obvious what that means. And reductionistic people are the realists of the world, and in our current age, they rule the world. Viktor Frankl, best known for his book Man's Search for Meaning, was one of David Elkin's students, and David Elkin wrote Beyond Religion. Frankl had survived the concentration camps of Hitler and was deeply concerned about reductionistic science and the desacralization of human life. One day in class, to show us the limitations of operational definitions, he defined a kiss as nothing but the affixing of the upper ends of two gastrointestinal tubes. When the students in class laughed at this, he said, "You're right to laugh, because intuitively you know that while this definition is technically and operationally correct, a kiss is more than that. And it is the more, the very part that reductionism leaves out, that makes a kiss human and gives it its true meaning. Transcendent perception is the ability to see the more." Another piece on the right hemisphere, going back to Mahatma Gandhi, one of his quotes is, "The problem with humanity is that we are not living in our right minds." So he lived in his right minds, and so do all the other saints that we all look at, that we're all, our norm is living in the left hemisphere, the left part of the mind, and theirs was living in the right part of their mind, the right hemisphere. And finally, my stroke of insight. I've spoken about this in other videos so far. There's a book, but I urge you to watch the 18-minute video called My Stroke of Insight. It is all about the relationship between the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, and it's just worth the 18 minutes to do that, because I think it is that shocking and that important. So the right hemisphere is one of the two ways we can have contact with our inner essence or our soul, because that's where the other grounding point besides the ego is living. So if we don't have enough contact with our right hemisphere, it's easy to miss the second grounding point. And the second grounding point is fierce, is compassionate, is hopefully where we are going in the evolution of humanity. The other way to access the inner essence is through intuition. And if you want to go back and watch the video called about a fully functioning human, we talk about intuition there. But I want to give you a couple of other quotes from amazing people about intuition in this video. The first one is coming from Agatha Christie from 1926 in one of her books called The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. But here's what was written about it, and here's what was believed in 1926. Women observe subconsciously 1,000 little details without knowing that they are doing so. Their subconscious minds add these little things together, and they call the result intuition. I know growing up in the 1950s, I was told again and again and again, it's a woman's intuition, Neil. Don't worry about that, you don't have it. So in 1926, they were also talking about intuition just being with the women. These days, I think we all know it is with all genders. However, we could get into why women may have greater access to their intuition, but I'm not going to do that at this moment in time. So that's one quote. The second quote is one of my favorite medical intuitives. Her name is Mona Lisa Shultz. So just for a side moment, if no matter what your last name is, wouldn't it be kind of bold naming your child Mona Lisa? I mean, isn't that just kind of crazy cool? A medical intuitive, and there are a list of them, and you can Google them or look them up, is someone who, through their intuition, they literally can, as well as some doctors, without doing any tests whatsoever, look and see what's not functioning well physically inside of a human body. And there are a small group of doctors, I'm not going to name them because they don't want to be named probably, who literally would call some of these medical intuitives, including Mona Lisa Shultz, and go, "I've got a tricky case here, can you please give me your insight on what's going on there?" And they're living so much in their right hemisphere and their intuition that they're able to see and do stuff. Here's what Mona Lisa Shultz says about intuition. Intuition occurs when we directly perceive facts outside the range of the usual 5 senses and independently of any reasoning process. And she also says, intuition is simply a sense that is common to each and every one of us. It's neither a magic power nor just the crazy hunches of egocentrics. It's a real down-to-earth capacity that is available to anyone willing to tune in his, her, or their transmitter and listen into what's being broadcast. The information it offers us is practical, and it can immeasurably improve and enrich our lives. In this light, intuition is common sense operating on the most fundamental, spontaneous level. And finally, my wife, Dr. Jan Wall, did her doctoral dissertation on integrating contemplative practice into the undergraduate pursuit of finding and following an intuitive call. And I want to just start with the beginning of that because I think it's absolutely powerful. I'm going to read it right from her doctoral dissertation. I was 100 miles away from any road or path traveling down the Amazon River in Ecuador. As co-leader and one of the faculty members of a study-away adventure with 20 college students, I was seated in the first of several hollowed-out trees which served as canoes, taking us away from our base camp to our individual family home stays. I would spend the night with a family whose community members used to be known as the headhunters of the Amazon. In the middle of the night, and because I was considered a guest, always an honor in this community, the father of the family placed palm leaves on the ground for my bed. The air was filled with the sounds of bats flying, dogs chewing on chicken bones, wild pigs rustling in the bushes, and a gentle rain shower adding a constant melody to it all. In spite of the sounds both inside and outside the hut, inside and outside my head, exhausted from days of hiking and exploring, within moments I fell deeply asleep. Suddenly I awoke to a sharp sting in my left foot. The pain was considerable, and my left leg went numb. However, in that moment, from some inner sense or way of knowing, I knew everything would be fine. I didn't speak Schwa, the native language, but in the morning the father, who happened to be the son of a shaman, communicated that the sting was from a scorpion and that I was not in any real danger. I trusted my inner guidance and the wisdom in the face of this man. After spending the day gardening and remaining present to the beauty of the jungle, I was taken by canoe, navigated by an 8-year-old boy, to the group's base home where another shaman looked at the spot where I was stung. He sucked the poison out of my foot, smiled, walked into the jungle to retrieve a leaf. He chewed the leaf, smiled again, and applied the salve from the leaf to my foot. I begin with this story because I experienced much of my life, including how I learn through the lens of what might be called my intuitive, imaginative, or an inner way of knowing. Bringing this to a close now, I just want to read 2 quotes, and that'll be that. The first one is what is meant by Namaste, which some of you may know and some of you may have seen, but I want to read it to you. It's Hindu. It's coming from India. The simple word uttered with a gesture of folded hands is among the finest salutations mankind has ever been able to vocalize. It simply means, I honor the place in you, in which the entire universe dwells, that place of love and light, and of truth and of peace. When you are in that place in you, and I am in that place in me, we are one. How can that happen? When I'm in my right hemisphere and you're in your right hemisphere at those moments in time. And the last quote is going to come from The Soul of Psychosynthesis once again. It's a quote from Roberto Assagioli once again, and it is, you are here with all of your past. I am here with all of my past, and then we'll proceed into our futures. But our souls with a capital S, or selves with a capital S, there we are one. So there's something about our inner essence and the right hemisphere and intuition that it would be great if humans understood that and nourished that other grounding inside of us. We all know about the ego all too well. How many of us know about the second grounding point, the inner essence or the soul, and can live there and know how to go back and forth? Thank you very much, good people. Be well.